Now, it's time to introduce our first keynote, Navigating Uncertainty with Dr. Natalie Nixon. A global speaker, Dr. Nixon is the creative strategist and president of Figure Eight Thinking and the author of the book, The Creative Leap. Unleash curiosity, improvisation, and intuition at work. Through her work, she emboldens leaders and organizations to apply creativity and foresight for transformative results. For leaders in higher education to emerge out of this new normal stronger and more inspired, Dr. Nixon believes you must utilize creativity to enable future-friendly transformation and navigate ambiguous terrain. During her presentation, she will explain how practical creativity techniques can help us navigate this murky terrain, shift our mindset, and stretch our thinking in life. Today, she will offer us an alternate lens to view the trajectory of our work and gain inspiration to move forward amid uncertainty. She will also teach us how to adapt and disrupt our own thinking for more meaningful outcomes. I want to read you a passage that I thought was fitting for our community. From her chapter, Commune, Come Together to Create. She writes, fast forward decades later, at 8:30 on a Sunday mornings, I show up at Dance Fit to begin my ritual of a thorough stretch class, followed by a vibrant, sweaty, booty-shaking hip-hop dance class. It is a form of restoration and renewal for me. What most excites me about these classes is that they are my way of getting back to my dance tribe. And through this chapter, she talks to us about the importance of the tribe and ends this passage by saying, I reference tribes because I believe that sense of community and the ability to work together towards a common goal are essential to creativity. Community is the ideal space in which wonder and rigor can thrive. I could not think of a more fitting passage for our education community, and it's my pleasure to present Dr. Natalie Nixon.
Thank you so much, Nappy. Thank you for that awesome introduction. Thank you, Capture Higher Ed, and the entire community who is gathered here today. You know, it's funny, I still am very active with dance, but I actually took an outdoor hip hop dance class last night. It's been a true lifesaver for me during the COVID-19 pandemic. So let's begin. Over the next 45 minutes, I would like to share some ideas, pose some questions, and also offer a little takeaway for you all as well. So let's begin with me sharing my screen. And great, it looks like that's all good. So we're talking about navigating uncertainty. And I actually want to begin with an illustration that to me tells such an incredible story. This was on the cover of the December 7th, 2020 New Yorker magazine. It's an illustration by the cartoonist Adrian Tomine. This is called Love Life. And one of the things I love about Love Life, this illustration, is that it has so many scrumptious details. In fact, each time I revisit it, I see a new detail. So for example, the young lady who's on a Zoom date of some sort, you can see that her legs aren't shaven, that her bedroom is a hot mess, her kitchen is full of dirty dishes, she's got several bottles of wine on the top of the fridge. And in the full illustration, you can see even more details. But I'm starting with this image because the past 18 months or so have been a time, a chapter of our world, of our lives, when we've had to navigate increasingly blurred boundaries between work and home, work and learning, as you all are astutely aware of, and learning and play and work and play. And I believe that this illustration is actually some foreshadowing for what awaits us, foreshadowing, but yet hopefully we've learned some incredible lessons about ways that we can navigate this uncertainty, these blurred boundaries in ways that aren't, that won't make us feel as unsettled as I'm sure the young woman on this Zoom date is feeling in this context. And I also want to give a nod to another article I read. This one was much earlier in 2020. This was back in March of 2020. This was an interview in the Harvard Business Review with one of the world's foremost thought leaders on the topic of grief. And this gentleman's name is David Kessler. He was interviewed by Scott Baronato. And there were two major takeaways I had from reading the interview with Mr. Kessler. Number one, the 5 stages of grief that we typically think of, and those are denial, anger, bargaining, sadness, and then finally acceptance. These stages are totally nonlinear. So if you, like me, have been feeling like an emotional ping pong ball, you're not alone. It's totally normal. If you feel yourself on one day totally accepting of our new normal, and then the next day going into denial or bargaining, then slump into sadness, and then you're okay again. You accept things. So the first takeaway was that the stages, the so-called stages of grieving, are nonlinear. And here was the next takeaway, which I thought was fascinating. He said we should actually add on a 6th stage of grief. We shouldn't end on acceptance. We should actually end on meaning, MEANING. And the reason why that really resonates with me is that as a creativity strategist, I know that creativity is all about the business of meaning making. Creativity is what helps us identify purpose and helps us to identify our next normal. And we're having to do this in the midst of what I would call a triple pandemic. This is a pandemic that's been gunning for us on the health dimensions, and also these other 3 ways. Societally, so we've seen in the United States in the unforgettable summer of 2020 of all the social justice protests, which culminated in the insurrection in January of 2021, a kind of a social pandemic. We've experienced certainly our centennial generation. We have my husband and I, we have a 20-year-old daughter who's going to her junior year in college. This is a generation that is astutely aware of the constraints on our environment. So we're going through an environmental pandemic, and of course the health pandemic. So there's a lot that we're having to navigate. There's a lot to grieve. There's a lot of loss. And if we understand that in the process of navigating these blurred boundaries, that we could really end not on the plateau of acceptance, but on this uptick of meaning, that is everything. And the great news is that creativity helps us to navigate that uncertainty. It helps us to identify a new true north and a new way forward. Now, I've been really interested in how many incredible leaders around the world of some of the largest companies in the world have been talking unabashedly about the value of empathy. So, for example, Frederick Furt, who is the chief innovation evangelist at Google, spoke back in January of this year about how empathy is the skill of the future. And I agree that empathy is the skill of the future, but I would add on a bit to Mr. Furt's assertion. And I would say that we're missing a step if we only start with empathy. Because before empathy, we actually have to start with curiosity. Because curiosity is the precursor to empathy. And in my view, curiosity is the currency of the future. And those who work in higher education, as you all well know, you are all about building the capacity for curiosity. And now more than ever, this is an essential capability. So here's how I like to think about how important and how valuable curiosity is. So curiosity is the precursor to empathy. Empathy ideally will lead to action, and then action hopefully will lead to equity. So there is a solid through line from building curiosity and the capability of curiosity to building equity in all of our systems of society. And I like to call this the curiosity factor, which is fundamental to creativity. Ray Dalio, who is the chief investment officer at Bridgewater, has said that great questions are a much better indicator of future success than great answers. And any of you who have ever been in the classroom, I think you would agree. And I should just reveal that I was a professor for 16 years. So I certainly agree with this assertion. I could tell so much more about the quality of a person's mind by the types of questions that they pose, much more so than the answers that they regurgitate. So as a creativity strategist, I spend a lot of my time collecting signals on the landscape. Part of my practice incorporates foresight. Now, foresight is really has nothing to do with telling or predicting the future. Foresight is actually about being incredibly situated and rooted in the present. So I want to share with you some of the signals on the landscape that I've been collecting that point to the value of curiosity, empathy, creativity, in short, the value of what I like to call the human quotient. So the first thing I'll reference is a really nifty offering that's just taken off in the past 2 years. It's called Masterclass, and my husband gifted it to me for Mother's Day about 2 or 3 years ago. I became an instant fan. And as a former academic, one of the things I really appreciated about Masterclass is that it really hits the crux of what we would call edutainment, right? It's really good at curating incredible thought leaders who are subject matter experts who have the street cred to prove that they know what the heck they're talking about, mixed in with a high production value. And it's learning on the time of the learners, on their means and on their basis, right? So it's not about, you got to come to class Monday, Wednesday, and Friday for this 50-minute block of time. No, it's about co-creating and curating a learning offering on the timing that works for the learner. This is significant. The second signal that I think is really interesting, this actually showed up in my inbox 2 months ago. I don't know about you all who have taught before, who work in higher education, but certainly someone like me who, there's a chapter of my life where I was a middle school English teacher. I then became a professor for 16 years. I used to really wince at some impolite comments I would hear or overhear that would say things like, well, those who can't teach, because that clearly was an ignorant comment by someone or persons who have no idea about what's involved in the skill and the expertise and the craft of teaching. So it's phenomenal to me now of how many industries and sectors and companies are getting into the learning business. So this was cool. Fast Company offers a slew of courses. LinkedIn offers a slew of courses. And again, learning on the time of the people, right? In ways and means that make sense for them. But this was an interesting module. This was all about future-proofing your career. And what I dug was that the modules, the subsets in this particular course included design thinking, communicating with flair, personal growth, creativity and innovation, networking, and personal branding. So how fascinating it's been to me to see these signals on the landscape that are really speaking to the democratization of learning, as well as all of those skills that are so hard to teach that we previously have not spent a lot of time on. I've been predicting for quite some time that we're going to see a return to the apprenticeship model. We're going to see, sadly, some casualties in higher education coming out of the COVID-19 pandemic, but out of crisis, out of challenges and failures come opportunities for private sector and the educational sector to merge and to form interesting strategic partnerships. And I don't think this will be an apprenticeship model that we saw in the medieval times, but it will be an incredibly dynamic one that will be age diverse, that will be socioeconomically diverse, and that will emerge just at a time where we're seeing several cracks in the system of higher education. The other signals on the landscape that I have been collecting come from our popular culture. I love a good television series, and you have to admit, TV has never been better. Thank you, Netflix, and thank you, Hulu. And so I want to point to a few other signals from our popular culture that point to all roads really leading to the buildup of the human quotient. So the first example on the left is a hit television a sitcom called Blackish. And this is the character Junior. He is in this scene explaining in an exasperated fashion to his parents that, yes, I realize it, I've got into college, but I don't want to go right away. I want to take a gap year. And to his solidly bourgeoisie African-American parents, they are stunned, they are disgusted, they're mortified. They've worked all of his life to make sure he gets to the point where he can be college educated. Now, around the same time, a different television show was on where there was a similar subplot. This is second image is from the show Big Little Lies. And this is the character Abigail, who also exasperatedly, notice the body language of these two teens, how they mirror each other. She's explaining to her mom, Madeline, who's played by Reese Witherspoon, that, look, Mom, I don't even want to take the standardized tests. I don't want to go to college. In fact, I already have a job with a startup. Now, her mother is mortified because she never went to college. She was placing all of her hopes and dreams that her kid would go to college. Now, why do these two examples matter? They matter because we are seeing indicators in our popular culture that Gen Z, the centennials, are questioning the ROI of higher education. They're questioning the debt that they incur. They're questioning the teaching model. They want to learn by doing. They want to learn experientially. All roads for me that point to the value of creativity. And the last signal that I'll share for our time together today is this is from another great television show, Billions. This is the character Wendy Rhodes, and she works at Axe Capital. She's not just works at Axe Capital, she's among the C-suite. Now, this was significant to me because Wendy's character, Wendy Rhodes, is a psychologist. And I thought, this is fascinating. Here is this testosterone-driven VC firm where everyone wakes up every single day to make another 100 millions or so on the margin. And they have sitting with the founder, the CTO, the chief legal counsel, a psychologist. And what does she do? Her role is to help the teams individually. She'll have sessions with them. She helps them to tap into their inner child, visualize their future, meditation, deep breathing. Right? I have a liberal arts background. I studied anthropology and Africana studies in college. And I love that we see this indicator of the value of the humanities in the midst of a pretty traditional sector like financial services. So what's the headline out of all of this? Soft skills are hardcore. Soft skills like empathy, curiosity, collaborating, negotiating, active listening, creativity are not these woo-woo, frilly addendums. They are central and core to the work that lies ahead of us in the future of work. So this led me to the question, how might we design in more curiosity into our work, into our services, and your work into the ways that you recruit, into the ways you're building these cultures of learning? Well, here's the thing. In a world where we now know that we can work from anywhere, we can learn from anywhere, we can work from home, those organizations that work at the intersection of productivity, technology, and meaningful human connected experience will be the ones that thrive. These are the organizations and the institutions which will flourish. Now, what's happened is that most organizations have at least one of these down. They probably have the productivity one down, or so they think. Maybe they have two. Probably productivity and technology is what they're honing in on. And they may be stumbling a bit with the tech, but very few have figured out to also integrate on a consistent basis meaningful human experience and connection. Now, I'm biased, but I believe that creativity is the through line that connects productivity, technology, and experience. So let's dig a little bit more about why and how creativity is so increasingly significant now in this fourth industrial revolution and for the future of work and the future of learning. So the World Economic Forum has been ranking creativity as the #3 job skill for 2020 and beyond since 2016. And what I find really fascinating is that 1 year prior, in 2015, they said, creativity is going to rank as the #10 job skill for 2020 and beyond. And 1 year later, they changed their minds and bumped it up to #3. And it's funny because job skills numbers 1 and 2 are critical thinking and problem solving, which, P.S., that's still creativity. Stillcase has done some dynamic research where they've learned that 55% of people want to be more creative in their role. 19% point to lack of guidance or permission. And they also learned that the younger generations, Gen Y and Gen Z, they're showing a lot more creative ambition than older workers. Degreed and Fidelity Investments have also done some interesting research linking creativity to the roles of upskilling and reskilling. So I keep dancing around this question. And if you're wondering, well, how the heck do I define creativity? I don't fault you. So let's get into that. What is creativity? And I want you to pause and think to yourself, do you consider yourself creative? Who comes to mind for you when you think of creativity and creative people and creative endeavors? Well, a lot of the time in my consulting, especially in corporate environments, when I hear things, people mutter things like, oh, I'm not creative because I can't, fill in the blank, draw, paint, sing, dance, act, etc., right? Or I might hear, well, the creatives will take care of that later, or the creative team will do that. And what's happening is that often when we hear the word creativity and creative, we're thinking about musicians or visual artists, and maybe we have this really idealized vision of them. And in this image, a young lady whiling away the afternoon with the sunlight streaming down on her as she paints away. Perhaps we think of dancers who are skilled and talented and being able to tell story through movement. So artists, yes, are absolutely creative. But the challenge is that when we only conflate creativity with art and artists, we're missing the full picture. Because when we do that, we're ghettoizing creativity. We are siloing it. It just so happens that artists are outstanding at manifesting the ambiguous process of creativity. They don't shirk away from it. But if we only make creativity synonymous with art or artists, then A, that's not fair to artists, and B, that's not beneficial to our society at large. I tend to think of creativity in the following way. I define creativity as our ability to toggle between wonder and rigor to solve problems. And usually I stop right there, but sometimes I'll add on and create novel value. And that value can be financial value, cultural value, social value. So all of my thinking and ideas and probing about what creativity is all wrapped up in a book that I wrote, which Nappy so kindly referred to in his introduction, a book called The Creativity Leap, where I explain and share all sorts of ideas and thoughts and frameworks and tips and techniques to help us get better at toggling between wonder and rigor to solve problems. I interviewed over 50 people who come from a range of sectors and backgrounds to really test out this idea and understand, does this concept of toggling between wonder and rigor make sense to you? So let me share a few examples of some of the people I interviewed. So the woman in the black dress is Nicole Pittman. Nicole is an attorney, and she's one of the United States' foremost thought leaders and policymakers on a difficult topic of child sex offenders. And what I learned from Nicole was her uncanny ability to pose new and different questions in order to create alliances and bridge opposite sides of the aisle. The woman smelling my arm is Céline Barrel. Céline is a nose. She's a perfumée, and she's a nose at IFF, which is the International Flavors and Fragrances Association. She's actually from France. She's from Grasse, France, which is the center of the perfume industry in Europe. And what I learned from Céline was her incredible ability to balance chemistry and intuition. And Celine likes to say that her superpower is her ability to make real what no longer exists. So think about that. Think about when you smell a particular scent and it takes you back to a time or to a person or to an experience that is no longer real, but can be but that can become so vibrant again when you smell that scent. For me, when I smell Old Spice, I think of my pop, I think of my dad. I always consistently. The couple on the bottom left are Gary and Amy Mainoff. I'm from Philly, and just outside of Philadelphia is where their 5-acre fruit farm is in New Hope, Pennsylvania. And they're standing in front of their newest innovation. Now, I would like to just pause here and share that I define an innovation as an invention converted into value. While it's still an invention, it's not yet an innovation, but until it's converted into, I should add, scalable value, again, financial, social, and cultural value, then it becomes an innovation. So what's the conversion factor? Creativity. Creativity is how you go from an invention to an innovation. And that's exactly what happened to Gary and Amy. If you think that you have it bad trying to navigate a VUCA world that is volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous, try being a farmer. Farmers are the original hackers. They wake up every morning to contend with the uncertainty of the earth. And long story short, to read more about this story, you could read it in the book. But Gary and Amy essentially did a lot of research, a ton of experimentation, a ton of improvisation before they landed on their newest offering to their customers. They grow apples and pears and nectarines and peaches and berries throughout the summer, the apples and pears in the fall and winter. And they have now an incredible cidery vertical as part of their business. The gentleman in the middle is Randy Swearer. He's a former colleague of mine. He's now the vice president of learning futures at Autodesk. And I learned from Randy the ways that Autodesk uses orthogonal thinking, which is another way of talking about cognitive diversity. They make sure that they interrupt themselves and disrupt their own thinking by inviting in people from totally different backgrounds and sectors, a PhD in anthropology or astronomy, a former military general, a former head of a labor union, to look at problems that they've been staring at for months and ask and pose new questions. The gentleman in the black and white photograph is our family plumber, John Harker. And when I asked to interview him for a book on creativity, he thought I was kidding. And I was like, no, I really want to talk to you about creativity and your work. And once he started sharing stories and speaking, he waxed poetic. He's really a systems designer because he has to connect with and navigate between the carpenters, the electricians, the homeowners, the all of the different stakeholders involved in any kind of home construction project. And finally, in the red t-shirt, we have Daniel Goods. Daniel is the head of the studio at NASA's Jet Propulsion Lab. So I traveled out to Pasadena, California, met with Daniel and his team of social scientists, designers, and artists, and learned the ways that they serve as internal provocateurs for all of the heavy-duty aerospace engineering, scientific projects and experiments that are going on at NASA's Jet Propulsion Lab. This is creativity. These are examples of creativity as much as the examples that are go-tos in the arts. So here's what I want you to really have clarity on. That creativity is a productivity play, and it is fundamental for well-being. It's also a competency. It's something that we can exercise and get better at. Right now, in this fourth industrial revolution, there are 4 creativity leaps that we must make if we're going to survive the next 5 to 50 years. Number 1, we've got to leap away from only valuing our deep specialization and expertise to valuing being polymaths and recruiting for polymaths and developing polymaths. Number 2, we've got to leap away from only erring on the side of rationality and what's logical to also valuing what's ambiguous and becoming what I call ambiguous friendly and ambiguous confident. Number 3, we have to leap away from building organizations constructed of silos to really building community. And that short passage, excuse me, that short passage that Nappy shared was really about was kind of a preview into me talking about the connection between tribes and community. Community consists of tribes, but we have to go beyond our tribes in order to truly build community. And finally, we have to leap away from grasping onto that rule book to really building a plug and play playbook. So I propose, in order to make those leaps, that we've got to navigate and manage complexity with complexity. And as it turns out, the creativity is a very complex system. And here's what I mean by that. Creativity is actually a chaotic system. And a chaord is a word that D. Hock made up. D. Hock, some of you may know, was the founder, was the first president of Visa, the credit card company. And when Mr. Hock in the early 60s was given this charge of leading a global organization based on the virtual exchange of currency, he thought, let me go take a walk. He was a big naturalist. And he observed that in nature, there's some chaos, but there's also order. And, my words, not Mr. Hock's, he was essentially identifying that organizations are organisms. So he thought to himself, what if I could design an organization that mimicked the ways that nature's systems works? What if I could design an organization consisting of some chaos and some order? And he did a mashup of the two words, and he made up the word chaord. I want to create an organization that is chaotic, that has some chaos and some order. And this now is a fundamental component of chaos theory and organizational design. And once you start learning about chaotic systems, you see them everywhere because chaotic systems are emergent, they're self-organizing, and they are adaptive. So for example, the way in nature woods, jungles evolve over eons requires some chaos, some randomness, and some order. So chaos is not anarchy. Chaos is all about being random, and order is not about control. Order is about structure. So if you think about the way a sapling takes root on the earthen floor and over time grows into a tree, that's a combination of randomness, but also order in terms of plant science. The ways our bodies heal, if you skin your knee, there's not this permission slip culture going on. There's localized, self-organizing, emergent systems at work to ensure the healing of your knee. And jazz music is an incredible example of a chaotic system. The order shows up in the fact that jazz musicians practice incessantly. They know music theory. Their musical compositions have a beginning, a middle, and an end. There's a chord progression you're going to play through, etc. That's the order part. The chaos is the magic that happens in the interstices. And that is improvisation. All improvisational systems are complex, chaotic systems. So you can kind of sense the influence of chaotic systems on me in the way I think about creativity. Wonder is the chaos part, and rigor is the order part. So let's look a little bit more into wonder. Wonder is about curiosity and dreaming, pretending, supposing. It's often performative, and it's about envisioning really audacious futures. Wonder also requires us to pause, and it's about awe. And I was really happy to learn that some real intellectual heavy hitters have given a lot of credence to wonder. So Socrates said that wisdom begins in wonder. And centuries later, the Jewish theologian and civil rights activist Abraham Heschel wrote that it's wonder rather than doubt, which is the root of all knowledge. So whatever you carry forward from this conversation, this talk today, I want you to take away with you being able to identify who for you are your wonder mentors, living or dead, people you know, people in your family, people you work with. The reason why this matters is that when we catch ourselves falling off the track of having not enough wonder in our lives and in our work, we've got to be able to call upon, excuse me, examples of people, of mentors, of folks we know, folks we aim to be like in our lives, who exhibit the practices, the habits of wonder. So for me, I have a lot of wonder mentors, but children are consistently some of my best wonder mentors. They are exceptional at asking questions, at dreaming, at posing big what if questions, at envisioning, at pausing, and at being in awe of the ordinary. So make sure you can name at least 2 people, living or dead, who you can consider your wonder mentor. Then rigor. Rigor is about practice, discipline, time on task, showing up over and over and over again. Is about commitment. Rigor is often very solitary work. It's not particularly sexy, and it is an essential component and dimension of creativity. Creativity is not doing whatever you feel like. Creativity is not pulling something random out of your armpit. There's so much intentionality and work and discipline and the order part, the structure, that's a part of rigor. Leonardo da Vinci, the original Renaissance man himself, said that any obstacle can be destroyed through rigor. So, where this is leading, I want you to think about, for you and your life and your work, who comes to mind as a rigor mentor? Who can you have as kind of your own personal avatar that gets you back on track to start learning and cultivating habits of rigor? So for me, one of my rigor mentors is the American dancer and choreographer Twyla Tharp. Twyla Tharp has a great book called The Creative Habit. And in that book, one of the brilliant things she writes is that before you can think out of a box, you got to start with a box. And that summarizes why rigor is important so well. So one of the things that Twyla Tharp does, even into her elder years, is every single morning she wakes up and she fastidiously stretches her body, no matter how she's feeling, no matter how much she doesn't want to crawl out of bed. And it's that rigor, that back to the fundamentals, basics, which allows her to be so expansive in her work. So it turns out that wonder and rigor are totally copacetic. They have an incredible feedback loop. And here's how I like to think about it, that wonder is found in the midst of rigor, and rigor cannot be sustained without wonder. Before I wrote The Creativity Leap, I actually developed a card game called the Wonder Rigor Discovery Deck. It's available on Amazon. And I made the card game really for my clients because I wanted to come up with helpful prompts and questions to help them identify when, where, and how to add in and build in more wonder or more rigor into their practice. So when I say that wonder is found in the midst of rigor, what do I mean by that? Well, have you ever been in the middle of a rigorous task like completing your taxes or finishing a lofty Excel sheet? And it's right there and then that a new idea emerges from your brain. That's what I mean when I say that wonder is found in the midst of rigor. And simultaneously, rigor can't be sustained without wonder. We can't churn and churn work and go from meeting to meeting to meeting and still expect to innovate. We have to pause. We have to be able to dream. We will not be able to sustain rigor if we do not design space and time for wonder. So as I conclude, I want to share with you some tactical techniques and tips for toggling between wonder and rigor to solve problems. And I came up with something I call the 3I creativity framework. The 3 I's are the ways that you can, on a consistent basis, toggle between wonder and rigor. And they are inquiry, improvisation, and intuition. And it doesn't matter where you start. It doesn't matter how much time you spend on one or the other. Just begin. And you'll see that they all are interdependent and interconnected, and they fundamentally lead to new insights. So, tip number 1, If you're trying to get better at inquiry and building curiosity, one of the things you can do organizationally is insist on creative abrasion teams. Now, creative abrasion is a term that was made up by Mr. Hirschbaum, who used to be the head of design for Nissan Automotive. Now, he understood that most people avoid collaboration like the plague, right? Because most people in organizations say, oh my gosh, why do we have to collaborate with this other team? We can do it so much faster by ourselves, right? But he understood that whatever design challenge his team was working on, he insisted people from manufacturing, sales, marketing, finance were part of the problem-solving process. Why? Because although there might be some abrasion, some friction at the beginning, he understood that we could convert friction into something positive. Why not convert it into something positive? So the process of building creatively abrasive teams has as its end game an incredibly positive outcome. Because if I come from finance and I'm working on a design challenge, I will ask totally different questions that will help to move the ball forward. And simultaneously, I will learn from the designers about a process that can inform my own work. Number two, if you want to get better at improvising, two things you can do. On an organizational level, really start to embrace prototyping. Prototypes are rough draft, ugly mock-ups. In fact, the uglier, the better. I just got finished working with a law firm client, leading them through a series of design sprints where they were I really was facilitating their ability to get better at prototyping services and experiences and processes before you had all the budget, before you had all the ideas figured out. Because when you prototype services, experiences, for example, through pop-ups, that's one way you could do that. Simple doodles is another way you can prototype. You learn by doing. You get better at embracing mistakes. You are basically going about the work of improvisation, which is about being adaptive, which is about being emergent. Secondly, on an individual personal level, if you want to get better at improvisation, but also inquiry and intuition, become a clumsy student of something. For example, I am currently a clumsy student of social ballroom dance. And it helps me to have an incredible sense of humor about myself. I'm improvising constantly. I learn to ask new and different questions of my classmates, of my instructors, and I have fun in the process. Remember, as we're talking about improvisation, that fundamentally plans are fiction. Now, I know that might make some of you uncomfortable, but here's why plans are fiction. They haven't happened yet. Whether it's your to-do list in the morning or it's a budget, and I do a to-do list every single morning, but knowing that plans are fiction helps me to have a much more adaptive approach. And here's the excellent news. You actually improvise every day. In fact, I bet you can think of at least 2 ways you hacked your way through this morning before lunchtime to support a spouse, a partner, a client, a child, right? And I love this photograph. I'm from Philly, as I've already mentioned, and some of our communities where there aren't the best playgrounds for kids, they hack their play. So this is a basketball hoop that's made out of a punched out the bottom of a milk crate, and it's quite subversive. They hung it under a no ball playing sign, which I love. And finally, if you want to get better at the third eye of intuiting and intuition is a type of pattern recognition. It's that nudge that I should go left, not right, to work with this person, not that person. Begin to document the last 3 times you followed that nudge. What was the result? And then document the last 3 times you ignored your intuition. What was the result? I learned in my interviews with over 50 people for writing The Creativity Leap that to a successful leader, they incorporate intuition into strategic decision-making. So here are the 3 I's. Use them abundantly, use them consistently, and you will find yourself being able to toggle between wonder and rigor much more effortlessly. I want to conclude by just making the business case for creativity, because that's one of my pet peeves when people, even after all this evidence and explaining and models that I share with people about how valuable creativity is, they still might have their doubts. So let's just go through. Here's a question I like to pose. What if we linked are key performance indicators to creativity. And let me be very meta here and use a technique that I've been advocating. So let me prompt some questions. What if we looked at KPIs for people by asking the following questions to integrate creativity? Who do we hire? Why do we only hire from those sorts of places? How do we hire? What's our hiring process like? How do we connect internally? Do we have rituals? Do we need new and different rituals? How do we design teams? That's on the people dimension. On the process dimension, are we incentivizing for creativity? Do we tie it to performance review? How might we use creativity to reframe our business models, identify new strategic partners? Can we integrate technology, AR, VR to spark creativity? And what if we normalized prototyping? And then in terms of place, here's another way to think about integrating KPIs for creativity. How might we redesign the office or our homes? What are the benefits of all these blurred boundaries that we've been experiencing this past year and a half? But what are some new concerns? And what if sensorial design became a thing? So think about these new questions. I'm sure you can think of even far more questions that will help you to take creativity seriously in terms of KPIs. And finally, if you're still not convinced, here's the business ROI of creativity. When we are more creative, we necessarily have to have more inventive thinking, we must collaborate more, and we have to be customer obsessed. And when we have inventive thinking, we come up with novel business models, which lead to new strategic partnerships, and that lands us new revenue streams. That's a business impact. When we are more creative, we collaborate more. And when we collaborate more, our productivity increases, efficiencies improve, and when efficiencies go up, costs go down. That's a business impact. And finally, if we are more creative, it's not about us anymore. It's about the people we're serving. We become customer and client obsessed. And that leads us to build, and design. That leads us to build and design more human-centered products and services that will lead to an increase in market share, sales, and brand loyalty. I'm so sorry. I'd like to end by offering a gift. It's my Wonder Rigor tip sheet. And if you go to this link, which I've designed for the capture audience for today, if you go to bit.ly/WR capture and you download these 16 tips of integrating wonder and rigor, it has to happen today. I will randomly select, one lucky winner to whom I will follow up with an email, and I will mail you a signed copy of the Creativity Leap. So go to this link, download your Wonder Rigor tip sheet, has to be today, and I will randomly select tomorrow morning one person who will receive a signed copy of the Creativity Leap. I want to end today by just sharing some wisdom from Albert Einstein to bring it full circle, who said that the important thing is to never stop questioning. So thank you so much. Going to end here, and I hope that you have an incredible rest of your conference.
Natalie, thank you so much. Heather, nobody can hear you. We're so excited to see your hand motions, though.
You'd think I'd learn after a year of doing Zoom meetings to turn off mute. Oh my gosh. Dr. Nixon, thank you so much. That was amazing. The thought of how wonder and rigor played together, so simple, but I've never heard it framed like that. Thank you for bringing that to the world.
I especially loved your idea of disrupting your thinking by bringing in people from other industries and that creative abrasion. I think for us this year in higher education, it's been such a trying year, and we've had to be creative in everything that we've done. And I never thought about bringing in people from other industries necessarily into those decisions. But, you know, as you talked about it, I saw examples of where we did. It was just never on my mind that we actually did it.
Absolutely. Dr. Nixon, as you think about the work that you've done, the preparation for your book, what has been one of the most memorable moments of this process for you?
So one is the learning that I get to do every time I conduct an interview. I hear an additional perspective, and that helps me to expand the way I've been thinking about creativity. I also love the surprises of how I learn the ways that creativity shows up. I mean, one of the people I interviewed is a chocolatier in Omaha, Nebraska. I was out in Omaha speaking at a conference, and I was taking a walk through downtown Omaha. I'd never been. It was really cool. And Cher was actually playing in the convention center next door, and I'm a fangirl of Cher. So that was Omaha super cool for me. But I walked into this chocolatier's boutique, and it turns out she's also a beekeeper. And that took me all down this new path of understanding a new way of thinking about complexity and chaotic systems by just understanding the ways bees design their own living systems. So there's always new learning. But since the book has come out, I would say the biggest gift has just been when I get feedback that people's copies are dog-eared and highlighted, and that it's helping people who never before considered themselves to be creative to actually understand that the work that they do in law, in owning a beauty parlor, in parenting, whatever it is, to understand how incredibly creative their work is and to add new ways and techniques to be more creative.
It's fantastic. I can tell you right now, the book is on my list. I will be ordering it this afternoon. I also went to your link, and I'm going to download that Rigor tip sheet and use that in the work that we do every day. Once again, Dr. Nixon, thank you so much for joining us. Lorna and I are going to take it off into the next piece. Have a great rest of the day.
Thank you for having me. Bye.